16 years after the tragic loss of his pregnant wife in a plane crash, a billionaire takes a stroll through the city and notices a teenage girl. The girl appears, and he is momentarily taken aback as he notices she looks just like his late wife. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to like this video to support the channel. Now, let's sit back and enjoy. Take a moment to unwind and immerse yourself in the tale. David Crawford sat in his office, gazing out at the city skyline. Even though it was all a blur, 16 years had flown by. The memory of Julia lingered like a cherished echo, always present in his heart as he had built an empire, expanded his fortune, and earned the respect of the corporate world. And while it may seem like it didn't matter, there's always a silver lining to every achievement. The moment the news broke about the crash, he faced a challenging situation, but he held on to hope for brighter days ahead. The future vanished in a moment, taking with it their unborn child. There had been no bodies recovered, just remnants of what once was a farewell without closure. Yet he had made an effort to reach out forward, yet there was always something that seemed to hold him back. Perhaps it was the way people whispered about him, about how a man of his power and influence still thrived in that penthouse, where he chose to remain single and never even considered the possibility of remarriage. The idea of dating sparked excitement, and naturally, people were buzzing with speculation about whether he had found someone special, had been through a lot. But the reality was more straightforward than it seemed. Had already given his heart away, and the woman who held it was off on a new adventure that evening. He left the office earlier than usual, stepping out to the bustling city streets where his driver had already pulled the car up, ready for the next adventure. To the curb, but David waved him off. He wanted to walk. Maybe it was the crisp autumn air and the way the setting sun cast long shadows over the pavement filled him with a sense of possibility, urging him forward. He wasn't sure where he was going, only that he needed to move. Then he saw her, and it was a fleeting moment, a passing glimpse through the crowd, yet his feet paused mid-step. The girl, likely no older than 16, stood at the edge of the sidewalk, eagerly waiting for the light to change. David felt a rush of excitement as his heart raced in his chest. Wasn't possible. He blinked, shaking his head as if to clear the illusion, but she remained, showcasing the same delicate features, the same deep brown eyes, the same high cheekbones, and full lips that he had traced with his fingertips 1,000 times. Julia, no, it couldn't be. The girl turned, her head tilted slightly, and the illusion shattered, revealing differences that were subtle yet undeniably real. Her hair was darker, her frame leaner, her expression more determined than Julia's had ever been, but the resemblance was unmistakable. David was still staring when the light changed and the girl crossed the street, blending into the bustling crowd around him, stayed firmly on the pavement, his thoughts racing with excitement. It was quite a fascinating trick of the mind, sparked by an abundance of ideas. After years of loneliness and grief, he was finally beginning to envision the possibilities he longed for. Shaking his head, he encouraged himself to move forward, but the image of the girl lingered on. Days passed, and David shared his thoughts. Himself to move forward, immersing himself in work and embracing the opportunity to create new memories that awaited him. Strive to reach the surface, yet a sense of unease danced at the edges of his mind. Then, one evening, as he walked past a row of small vendors selling everything from affordable electronics to delicious street food, he spotted her once more, this time with a sense of excitement. The girl stood a few feet away, engaged in a passionate discussion with an older man behind a cart. Stacked with fruit, her fists were clenched at her sides, her expression confident as the vendor gestured wildly, his voice rising above the murmur of the street. "I saw you embrace it," the man was. The girl replied with determination, "Don't lie to me, kid. I didn't steal anything. Back. I was just looking." David didn't hesitate. He confidently closed the distance, stepping forward, between them with the same confidence he carried into every boardroom. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was even, but the vendor paused, feeling the weight of the moment, while the man glanced at him and then at the luxurious watch adorning his wrist. David turned to the girl as he muttered about the tailored suit she was trying to take, whose expression had become even more resolute. "Is that true?" Her jaw firmed. With unwavering eye contact, David reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills were handed to the vendor, and it was considered paid for as the man took the. With a cheerful spirit, David tucked the money into his apron and turned back to his cart, exhaling happily as he glanced at the girl once more. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking, and it filled him with a mix of excitement and curiosity. She confidently stated that she didn't need your help, crossing her arms with determination in her voice. Voice carried echoes of Julia. You look like you could use it, he replied evenly. Her eyes sparkled with determination. Yeah, well, you're mistaken, she said, turning on her heel and confidently striding away. Before he could say another word, she vanished into the crowd just as swiftly as she had the first time. David stood there for a long time, his heart pounding. This was real. This was life. Playing tricks on his mind. The girl was genuine, and so was the feeling in his gut that guided him. He felt there was more to this than mere coincidence. Julia had been 6 months pregnant when she passed away, and they recovered her body, and now here was this girl, just 16 years old, looking exactly like. After years, David felt something for the woman he had loved and lost. Stir in his chest something sharp and unfamiliar hope. David found it hard to sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he was greeted by her face, Julia's face, shining back at him. The eyes of a girl who seemed to have her own path. The resemblance was strikingly clear, sparking curiosity, and twisting something deep in his gut, reflecting on 16 years of growth and transformation that had been taken from him, and now, out of nowhere, there was this girl who seemed impossible. He was eager for answers. By morning, he was already reaching out to Thomas Reed, the private investigator he had relied on for sensitive matters before. Thomas initially refrained from asking questions, recognizing the urgency in the situation. David's voice inspired enthusiasm, and he eagerly agreed to start right away as soon as David provided a description of the girl Thomas promised. He'd have something within the next few days. But David was feeling a bit restless as the hours passed. He immersed himself in work, eagerly taking every meeting he could and signing off on everything. Every document that landed on his desk was met with a challenge, yet he remained hopeful that his mind would eventually come around. Kept replaying the encounter over and over, recalling the way the girl had glared at him with determination, the sharpness. With a sharpness in her words, she declared that she didn't need your help, revealing the fierce spirit of a girl who had faced challenges head-on, had learned to fend for herself, and was cautious in trusting others, but beneath her tough exterior, David had glimpsed a spark of something special. Else in her something fleeting, a flicker of hope. The call from Thomas finally. 2 days later, David had just wrapped up a meeting when his phone buzzed with excitement. He answered right away, his voice a bit tense. Tell me you have something, Thomas. Exhaled sharply. I have something exciting to share, so you might want to take a seat for this. David gripped the edge of his desk, his pulse racing with excitement. Just tell me the girls. Ashley Moores is 16 years old and has experienced life in various foster homes. Her life and her records indicate that she was adopted as a baby, and that adoption she was terminated when she was around 8, and since then, she's been in the system. Thomas paused, contemplating her next move. She was discovered alone in a hospital as in. The notes in the file indicate that she was a survivor from a plane crash at Jane. Though David's breath came in a quick rush as he pressed a hand to his temple, feeling a surge of determination. To process the words "a plane crash," he repeated with a sense of acceptance. Yeah, and here's where it becomes intriguing. As the woman they thought was her mother arrived with severe injuries, identification with no personal belongings. She passed away at the hospital before they could determine her identity, but it seems they successfully saved the baby. The girl has been placed into the system as there were no known options available. Relatives. Thomas was a bit uncertain, but David, the timing aligns perfectly with the location, and it all seems to fit together for you. David sat down with a weighty sigh, his mind swirling with thoughts about his wife. Julia had been alive, even if only for a few hours. And their child was there too. He had believed the baby had died with her, but she had lived. Ashley was his daughter. He closed his eyes, his fingers tightening into a fist, reflecting on 16 years filled with her. Growing up alone, moving from place to place, while he enjoyed the comforts of his high-rise penthouse, he believed he had lost something precious. Everything. How did this happen? How had no one shared this? How had no one considered it? Investigate. You okay? Thomas's voice was now softer, more gentle. David took a deep breath, feeling a mix of emotions. No, he admitted with a hint of determination. I figured it out. Listen, I can really get into this. Let's explore and discover more about her journey and the people she has connected with, without any interruptions from David. I'm eager to see her. But I know the paperwork might be a bit of a challenge. Then you think. Thomas mentioned she's been independent for some time, and she's managing just fine. A stable home can be a bit cautious. And if you just show up, it might take some time to warm up. David understood this well. Patience had always been a challenge for him. He couldn't simply sit back and do nothing. After all, he had already experienced 16 years of life. With her, he was determined not to lose another day. That evening, he drove himself to the part of town where Thomas was. Had tracked Ashley down in a neighborhood that was different from his own, with charmingly worn apartment buildings and vibrant graffiti. Walls adorned with stories. Streets sprinkled with memories and faded posters of hope for those who were missed. He found it challenging to embrace the thought of her growing up here, facing challenges in a world that has so much potential for her to thrive. Everything she could have experienced safety and love. Yet she faced abandonment. By the very system that was designed to protect her, he noticed her sitting on the steps of a small convenience store, worn-out backpack slung over her shoulder. She was cheerfully chewing on the end of a pen, flipping through a battered notebook with a sense of purpose. Her brows furrowed in concentration, and the sight filled him with a warm feeling inside. Stepped forward, his pulse quickening. Ashley looked up sharply, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. A glimmer of understanding lit up her face, soon accompanied by a hint of curiosity. Once more, David took a deep breath and asked if they could talk. She responded with a dry laugh, shaking her head. You always keep going, don't you? He wasn't quite sure what to say, so he chose to stick with the truth. Not at the crucial moment, she observed him intently, her fingers gently tightening. With the pen in her hand, she spoke eloquently while David paused, feeling confident in the words he had practiced. He had replayed the moment a dozen times in his head, but now, standing in front of her, it felt like the perfect opportunity. How do you share your feelings with someone special? Their entire life had been a journey filled with unexpected twists, and the father they had never known had been out there all along, waiting for the right moment to connect. Unaware, I know who you are, he said with a sense of assurance. I know where you come from. Ashley scoffed, and with a light-hearted tone, David replied, You really think I care? Strong because I believe you deserve to know the truth. Something in him made her shift with a sense of anticipation as he revealed his truth, his chest tightening with the weight of honesty. You're discovering who you truly are. Imagine being your mother. Her name was Julia Crawford, and she wasn't just some unknown woman in a hospital. She was my beloved wife. Ashley's face went blank, and a slow, warm smile spread across her lips. That's adorable. So, what you're saying is that you're my long-lost daddy. You think I'm going to jump into your arms and express all the emotions about the time we missed? Lost. David flinched at her sarcasm, but he stood firm. He embraced the moment with an open heart, ready for whatever came next. He said quietly, I just need you to know that I didn't know. I thought you. If I had known you were alive, everything would have been different. He paused because of the possibilities ahead. The truth felt too heavy to voice, and Ashley's expression grew resolute. Well, I appreciate your presence, but I think it's best for us to go our separate ways for now. Wishing you all the best. She grabbed her bag, slinging it over her shoulder, and walked away with confidence, not looking back. David stood there, taking it all in. As she vanished into the night, his daughter was alive, and though there were feelings of resentment, there was still hope for understanding. David had always been someone who looked forward, and as he drove home that night, Ashley's words resonated in his mind like a haunting refrain, I don't need you. Stay the hell away from me. He had anticipated resistance, yet he found himself unprepared for the incredible intensity of her anger. It wasn't merely that she didn't. She had spent so many years learning to live without him. And now he was back in her life, bringing a sense of hope and possibility. Just an unexpected challenge in a life she had created for herself. But David had always been determined to stand his ground, especially not one that mattered. The next morning, he made a call to Thomas, asking for a new address he already knew, where she had been found as a baby, where she had bounced around the system. But now he was eager to discover where she truly belonged. He was determined to find her before she slipped away for good. She's in a foster home. Home, Thomas shared with him, his voice a bit unsure, but she has always been there for him. About a year before that, she experienced a lot of movement, exploring different places and never staying in one spot for too long. David clenched his jaw, recognizing how much sense that made. Of course, she had. A kid like Ashley was sharp, self-reliant, and full of energy, always ready for new adventures. The kind of girl people welcomed with open arms. She had developed the strength to thrive independently, which taught her the importance of being cautious with trust. Thomas shared the address, and David eagerly took action without hesitation. The house had a cozy charm and was ready for a transformation with its character-filled peeling paint and a fence that had stories to tell. It's a journey toward creating a home that can still be filled with warmth and love, just like he once dreamed for his child. Julia gently rocking their baby to sleep, sharing bedtime stories, and creating a childhood filled with joy. Despite the challenges, Ashley had been raised in a world that had yet to recognize her potential. He knocked on the door, ready for a confrontation. But the woman who answered was unexpected, answered with a casual air, as if it were just another day, even with a billionaire on her porch. "Ashley Moore's," David asked, his voice steady and calm. The woman took a deep breath. "She's in her room, and there's a chance she might want to see you after all. She can be a bit reserved with visitors." David nodded as he stepped inside the house. Cozy yet filled with character, it wasn't quite a home. He made his way down the narrow hall, paused in front of the last door, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before he confidently knocked. Twice silence, then a soft "What it's me," he said quietly. "David." The door swung open, and there stood Ashley with her arms crossed, ready for whatever came next. David said, "I really need to talk to you right now." A minute later, Ashley let out a short laugh, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "You're unbelievable," she said, turning away. She stepped away from the door, leaving it open just enough for him to follow. The room was small and simply decorated, with the bed invitingly placed. A pile of clothes in the corner awaits attention, and a few books are stacked on the desk, showing signs of use. After years of use, David's eyes brightened as they landed on a single frame photograph on the nightstand. Held no family ties or childhood memories. It was a symbol of her individuality. Standing in front of what appeared to be a school building, she had captured a picture of herself. He took a deep breath. "Ashley, what do you want from me?" she asked, arms still crossed. "You want me to say, 'Wow, thanks'? To find my dad? You want me to hug you and cry?" "No," David said softly, "I just—" She scoffed but still wanted him to stay and listen. He saw that as a green light to keep going. "I had no idea," he said. "I promise you, if I had known." "That's the thing," she interrupted, her voice lively and engaging. "You didn't. I understand that you didn't come searching for me during my 16 years in the system, and that's okay. Imagine sitting in your mansion, running your company, with determination radiating from your clenched fists. You had everything, and I had nothing." David felt the words resonate deeply within him. "But I thought you were gone," he said quietly. "I thought both of you were, but here you are." You didn't take a moment to notice her voice cracking or to wonder about it. You just moved on. David shook his head. "That's not true." She let out a shaky breath, her eyes sparkling with unspoken emotions. "Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up believing that you are unworthy of love? That perhaps no one will ever truly embrace you, come for you?" Her voice trembled. "You don't get to show up now and pretend like you care." "I truly care," David said, stepping forward. "I never stopped caring. If I had known, but—" "You didn't," she snapped, wiping at her eyes with determination. "I don't need you now. I'm moving forward with confidence and strength, embracing my independence and letting go of the past." Cut through him like a blade. Yet he chose to hide the pain from her. He had spent 16 years believing he had lost his daughter forever, and now she was standing in front of him, so close yet just beyond his grasp. "Not here because I anticipate anything from you," he said finally. "I'm here because you absolutely have the right to discover your roots and to understand that there was someone out there who cared for you deeply. That your mother loved you." Something flickered in her expression, but she masked it quickly. "You don't get to talk about my mother," she whispered. David exhaled slowly. "I loved her more than anything." Ashley turned away, her shoulders shaking. "You need to leave." David hesitated. He felt a strong urge to express himself. He wanted to show her something, anything that would help her believe in him and understand that he was not giving up on her, even if she had spent her entire life thriving on her own, and she was ready to embrace the possibility of believing in something because of him. Wanted her to. He took a step back. I'm not going anywhere, Ashley. She didn't respond. I'll give you space, he continued, his voice steady, but I'm not backing down. She stayed quiet as David turned and stepped out of the room, the house and back into the night. The cold brushing against his skin, but he hardly noticed. David had spent 16 years living, and he felt that Ashley was alive, even if she hated him, with determination. And he was ready to move forward. David sat in his office. Gazing at the city below, he found himself captivated by Ashley's face, filled with emotion, anger, pain, and the echoes of abandonment. In her eyes, he had anticipated some pushback, but the depth of her resentment was more challenging than he had expected. Imagined every word she had thrown at him had landed like a blow. But the worst part was that she wasn't wrong. He hadn't. He realized he hadn't looked, but there was still an opportunity for action. He chose not to reach out again. He quickly realized that if he pushed too hard, she might run away. Instead, he concentrated on what? He could make a few quiet phone calls from a distance, pulling a few strings behind the scenes. The story began at her school, where the records were a bit chaotic, and there were some missed payments. Inconsistent enrollment showed that she had experienced quite a bit of change, which could lead to new opportunities for growth. Through the cracks, David ensured her fees were covered, no questions asked. No notices were sent her away. Then there was her foster home. He had a clear understanding of the situation. It's wonderful to imagine that the place was caring for her in the way she truly deserved, so he ensured she had everything she needed. She discovered the source of the surprise, a new winter coat waiting for her on the bed, and the fridge was stocked with groceries. When supplies ran low, a thoughtful transfer into an account under her foster mother's name ensured she would always have what she needed. To focus on the basic necessities, it may not have been everything, but it was definitely a step forward for him. Watched from a distance, aware that she might never acknowledge what was happening, but at least she was safe, and that was something to hold on to. Had what she needed to get through each day, he told himself it was enough for now, and he believed that better days were ahead. It was Thomas who shared the information, and while David felt uncertain about whether it was intended as a warning or simply a statement of fact, there was a sense of curiosity in the air. Skipping school, the Pi said one afternoon, his voice filled with a hint of excitement. And not just once or twice, she's been taking a little break these past few weeks. David set his pen down slowly, wondering where she might be heading for a couple of hours. A time spent with a consistent group of kids who may not be the ideal influence for your daughter. But David felt positive about the experience. There's a hint of something challenging in his chest, a reminder of struggles, yet there's always room for hope and healing. Conflicts could be about theft, but perhaps it's something else. Great. David exhaled sharply. He realized it was going to be a bit more complex than he initially thought. Ashley had spent her whole life thriving on her own, and she was ready to embrace the possibility of new beliefs. Someone would take care of her now. He knew this was more than just rebellion. It was. Her feelings were a culmination of experiences, expressing themselves in the only way she understood. But he was ready to move forward. And that night, he chose not to call Thomas or send someone else. He took charge and went himself. It didn't take long to find her. She was exactly where he expected. Thomas had mentioned she'd be leaning against a graffiti-covered wall in the back of a convenience store parking lot, surrounded by 3 other kids. One of them was laughing joyfully, cigarette in hand, while another flipped a pocket knife between his fingers, and David, filled with confidence, didn't hesitate. He walked confidently toward them, embracing the moment as he stopped a few feet from Ashley. "We need to talk, Ashley." The whole body was tense. "Can you believe this?" Her friends shared glances, one of them scoffing. "Who is this?" "Go, Ashley," she muttered, shoving away from the "I'll catch up later." The boys hesitated, but in the end, they decided to step back. As she disappeared around the corner, she turned to him the moment they were out of sight, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" "Preventing you from making a mistake," David said calmly. She let out a light laugh. "Oh? It's surprising that you believe you can just come in here and tell me how to live my life after all this time. 16 years have passed, and here you are. Suddenly, you're my dad." David held her gaze, calmly standing his ground against her anger. I understand that I may not hold that role in your eyes, and that's okay, but I do care about what happens to you. She scoffed. That's amusing because I'm managing to take care of myself just fine without you, he said quietly. Skipping school and spending time with people who might not have your best interests at heart can feel like a risk, but remember, there's always a chance to make better choices and find a brighter path ahead. Taking care of yourself is essential. Her jaw clenched, but there's always a way forward. I may not know everything about you, but I believe you have so much potential, he said, his voice steady, expressing confidence in what you truly deserve. She crossed her arms tightly, looking away. But there's always a chance for improvement. Why do you even care? Because you feel a sense of responsibility, believing that resources can bring about positive change. My daughter, he said simply. Her throat bobbed, but she shook her head. You don't. David took a step closer, his voice softer now. I'm here to share something special. I've got your back, Ashley. I'm not here to make up for anything with a bunch of favors. I'm here to remind you that you're not alone. Anymore, whether you like it or not. She let out a determined breath, her fingers tightening into fists. I don't need a billionaire father coming in to support me, while David's expression remained unchanged. I may not be needed, but I'll always be here because that's the role of a father. For a moment, she paused, standing there with her body completely still, with the weight of emotions she chose to keep inside. She eventually turned away, she muttered, I don't want this. I don't want you. David nodded, embracing the moment even though the words had a profound impact. More than he was ready to acknowledge. I can see she left with her head held high. Back, David stayed put, and while he didn't stop her, he also wasn't moving on. Ashley didn't either. Transformed in an instant after David spoke with her outside the convenience. At the store, she seemed to be struggling, almost as if she was determined to demonstrate something to him. She embraced the fact that his sudden interest in her life was just a fleeting moment, and she began to enjoy skipping school more and staying out later, with a sense of purpose. He chose to overlook the safety nets he had thoughtfully established for her, and he learned from Thomas that she had embarked on an adventure. Small scuffles that stayed manageable and never reached the point of police involvement, yet were thrilling enough to create a sense of excitement. His stomach twisted into knots. David sensed what she was doing. She was testing him. She was curious to see if he would persevere, if he would rise above frustration and stay. Unlike so many others who had turned away before him, deep down, she held on to the hope that if she pushed hard enough, he would show her that someone could stay, that someone truly cared. David truly desired her, but after losing 16 years, he was determined not to let her sway him. Out of her life now. He didn't lecture her. He didn't show up at her school to encourage her to attend class. He chose to remain calm and composed instead of resorting to threats or ultimatums. With unwavering determination, he ensured her school fees were still covered. Absolutely, there was always food in the fridge. He ensured that, no matter what, she had everything she needed. She always knew where she would sleep at night, and even when she turned away, there was a sense of hope in the air. Their paths crossed, and he guided her until that night when he received the call. Thomas's voice was clicked urgent. She found herself in a tricky situation after taking something from a store. The owner decided to call the cops, but they haven't booked her yet. If you get there quickly, you might be able to manage it quietly. David was all ready. Grabbing his keys, the drive felt like an adventure ahead, his hands gripping the wheel with anticipation. Around the wheel as he pulled up to his small corner store that had seen better days in a part of town he was yet to explore, the sign above. The entrance shimmered gently, casting a soft light on the weathered pavement inside. Ashley sat in a plastic chair near the counter, arms crossed and a thoughtful expression on her face. A man, likely the store owner, stood behind the register with a thoughtful expression. A uniformed officer leaned against the wall, jotting down notes as David stepped inside, feeling a sense of anticipation in the air. With a presence that drew the attention of all three heads, the officer straightened slightly, as if acknowledging something significant. The store owner pointed at Ashley as she attempted to lift a few items, showcasing her determination. I noticed that Ashley was quiet, just looking down at the floor, with a tight jaw. David exhaled sharply and turned toward the officer, eager to know if she had been charged. The officer acknowledged that the owner was open to letting it go if someone showed interest. David looked at the man behind the counter, and even though the guy seemed a bit irritated, He offered a nod that felt like a small step forward. Didn't want to disrupt her life over a few stolen snacks, but this isn't a charity either. David pulled out his wallet, handed over a few bills for the trouble, and the man paused before accepting them. With a hint of frustration, David turned back to Ashley and said, "Let's go." Gently pushed out of the chair, moving slowly and deliberately, as if this was just another small bump in her evening. They stepped outside, the crisp air embracing them in the stillness. Then David paused, turning to face her completely. With his hands on his hips, his patience was finally wearing thin. "What were you thinking?" Ashley rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. We can't just ignore this." David snapped. "Let's not pretend this is insignificant. What should we do?" "Ashley, it seems like you're hoping for me to get upset or perhaps to step back a bit." "I'm not going to." She threw up her hands. "So, why do you care? You're my daughter." His voice resonated through the quiet street. He seldom raised his voice, but in this moment, it was filled with warmth and certainty. "It's hard to believe you would consider this, as you are my daughter, and I truly want the best for you. I can't just stand by and watch you make choices that could lead you astray." Ashley's face reflects my concern. With her hands twisted and clenched at her sides, I realized I had been perfectly fine without you for 16 years. David stepped closer, his jaw tightening. "So, why are you putting in so much effort to push?" She flinched just slightly before covering it up with a burst of anger. "I'm cautious because I've seen that people like you often move on. Every time I allow myself to think that someone cares, they move on." David felt a tightness in his chest from the impact of her words, hitting him harder than anything she had said before. She wasn't just angry, she was filled with a deep concern about getting. The pain of feeling abandoned once more, of daring to believe in something only to see it taken away. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, quieter now. She let out a light laugh. "You say that now?" David held her gaze. "And I'll keep saying it until you truly believe me." Ashley looked away, her heart full of hope, shoulders rising and falling as she worked to maintain her composure. "You can't fix me," she muttered. "I don't want to fix you," David said. "I just want you to find peace. Acting as if you don't deserve something greater than this." She remained quiet for a while. Then finally she took a step back. "You don't get to show up now and play the hero." He watched her as she turned and walked away, leaving him with a sense of hope for what might come next. As she disappeared down the street, her silhouette becoming smaller against the city lights, David ran a hand down his face, exhaling with a sense of hope. Slowly, she was hesitant to believe him, but he was determined to keep trying, now and always. Ashley stormed away, her heart racing with a mix of emotions, including anger and frustration, but also a spark of determination. It was hard to pinpoint. Perhaps it was fear, or maybe something even more profound. She was not quite prepared to confront David Crawford, who was meant to be just like everyone else. Another adult who arrived a bit late, trying to show they care and believing that a few kind words could make a difference. And a checkbook, but he was determined to stay, no matter how much she pushed, no matter how sharp her words were. He stayed, and that filled her with a sense of uncertainty, because what if she started to? She believed in him. What if she let her guard down, allowed herself to want something from him? And then he left anyway? She walked on, hopeful. Wandering through the streets, the cool night air invigorated her skin, though her hands were still shaking and her body remained tense. There was a sense of possibility in the air. From the struggle, she felt a sense of purpose, knowing she had to keep moving forward. She felt the urge to escape the heaviness of David's words, the way his voice had trembled when he shared his feelings with her. By the time she reached the rundown apartment where her friend Jason lived, she felt a sense of accomplishment despite her exhaustion. Knocked on the door, and a moment later he answered, his hoodie pulled up, his breath carrying the scent of cheap beer. "You look like hell," he said, smirking. "Yeah, well," she muttered, stepping inside. "It's been one." On those nights, Jason eagerly flopped onto the couch, controller in hand, ready for some fun. Half focused on the video game on the screen. "You're excited to hang out here, Ashley." She shook her head, her arms wrapping around herself. "No, I just need to get out of here." Here he glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "You good?" "No," she admitted. "I just—" Jason tossed his keys onto the table, ready for an adventure anywhere but here. "Car. Then just bring it back in one piece." Ashley hesitated, but only for a moment. She embraced the moment, feeling a sense of empowerment as she grabbed the keys and stepped back out into the night. The rain refreshing and invigorating. It had started with a light drizzle by the time she hit the road, but it quickly transformed into something more substantial. The streets were slick, the street lights reflecting in pools of water along the pavement, but Ashley embraced it all with a smile, pressed her foot harder on the gas, the engine growling with excitement as she sped through the open roads, fully immersed in the moment. Wasn't feeling, she just wanted to embrace the journey ahead, leaving behind the anger, the hurt, and the years of hope. She wanted to be everywhere and with everyone but herself. The tires glided a bit as she took a turn with excitement, but she hardly noticed the refreshing rain pounded against the windshield, the wipers working hard to keep up. She tightened her grip on the wheel, her breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. And then in an instant, a new challenge emerged. The red light appeared just in time, the car in the intersection, the blinding headlights. Her heart raced as she yanked. The wheel turned to the side, the tires screeching against the wet pavement as the car spun out of control, gliding toward the barrier at the edge of the road. For one fleeting second time seemed to slow. Then the impact brought the crunch of metal and the sudden jolt that propelled her body forward. With the seatbelt holding him in place, the glass shattered, and then there was darkness. David had just made it home when his phone rang and he saw the unknown number. A spark of curiosity ignited in his gut. Twisted, he answered immediately. Mr. Crawford's voice was calm, yet assertive. "This is St. Luke's Hospital. We want to inform you that your daughter, Ashley Moores, was involved in a car accident. Should come right away." The world shifted beneath him, and he couldn't quite recall the drive. His hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, his mind racing through every possibility as he considered the words, car accident, playing over and over in his mind, overwhelming him, stealing the air from his lungs. He had just had a disagreement with her, and she had walked away from him, feeling a mix of emotions but resolute in her strength to show that she could thrive on her own. And now she was in a hospital, unconscious but in critical condition. There's hope for recovery ahead. He was determined not to lose her too. By the time he reached the hospital, he was already asking for answers from the nurse at the desk. The front desk was bustling as he eagerly pushed past, searching for someone, anyone, who could help. Let him know that it was quite a challenging situation. But finally a doctor approached and shared the good news that she's stable, even though she's still unconscious. There was a notable impact from the crash we're keeping an eye on for internal bleeding, but at this moment, we just need to wait. David was just on the edge of hearing the words. He was in a state of unconscious anticipation. Led to her room, and the sight of her filled him with hope. Ashley lay still in the hospital bed, her face pale but surrounded by the promise of recovery. She had a small cut above her eyebrow and 4 on her arm, yet she looked impossibly young. Delicately fragile, he sat beside her, gripping the edge of the bed as he let out a shaky breath, filled with hope. "Please wake up," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can't lose you too." His chest ached, but he held on tightly. After so many years of believing his child was lost, he finally found her, even though she slipped away once more. He would embrace every ounce of her anger and every hateful word if it meant she would just open her eyes. Hours passed, and he remained hopeful. The machines beeped steadily beside him, a rhythmic reminder of the passage of time. After a moment of stillness, there was a delightful little movement, a gentle twitch of her fingers. David's head lifted. His breath momentarily caught as her eyelids danced with life. Then, slowly, her eyes opened, and for a moment, she looked around, blinking in wonder. Bright hospital lights illuminated the room, and as her gaze turned towards him, a spark ignited within her. Softened, he wasn't angry, he wasn't disappointed, he just looked relieved. "Hey," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. Ashley swallowed, her throat feeling dry. "You're here," she said. "Of course I'm here," he whispered. "I'll always be here." Something sparkled in her expression, and for the first time, she believed him. Ashley drifted in and out of sleep, her body feeling the weight of exhaustion and the gentle effects of pain medication. Each time she surfaced, she anticipated waking up alone, as that was her usual routine. She was always capable of taking care of herself. She embraced her independence and welcomed the possibility of connection, and every time she opened her eyes, and there was David, still there. At first, she tried to ignore it. She attempted to reassure herself that it didn't matter, yet it truly did. He sat in the chair beside her bed, his posture reflecting a mix of concern and hope. Her face, marked by fatigue, suggested that he had been struggling to find rest, if he had managed any at all. His suit jacket was casually draped over at the back of the chair, his shirt had a few wrinkles, and his tie was loosened, giving him a relaxed appearance. Unlike the cold, untouchable billionaire she had first met, he now appeared to be a man full of potential, as if he was simply waiting for the right moment. I observed him when he wasn't aware, taking in the rhythm of his fingers tapping against his knee and the gentle way he exhaled, slowly, as if preparing for unexpected news. He was here for a reason. The commitment he felt, and that understanding filled her with a sense of excitement more than anything else. She spoke a day later, her voice soft as she murmured, "You're still here." Though it had been rough from disuse, David's head snapped up, his expression brightening with relief. "Absolutely. I'm here. You don't need to worry at all." "Yes, I do." His voice was quiet but firm. "I've almost lost you," something in his. The tone made her look away. She had never experienced someone saying that before, never had. Someone acted as if her life was incredibly valuable, and she was filled with possibilities for what to do with it. Silence settled between them, but for the first time it felt refreshing. It wasn't filled with anger or resentment. It was simply a moment when a nurse came in to check her vitals. Ashley responded effortlessly to a few questions while she was away. David leaned in a bit, a spark of curiosity in his voice. "Can I ask you something?" he said to Ashley. He glanced down at his hands before meeting her gaze again, curious about what was next. "What occurred for you before all of this?" "Before the foster homes?" Ashley shifted, feeling a bit uneasy with the depth of the question that had never truly been posed before. As people often jump to conclusions based on what they read, reports glanced at the files, yet no one truly inquired as she gently tugged at a loose thread on the hospital blanket. Avoiding his eyes, "I don't remember much from when I was little, just a lot of moving around. But I know there's always a chance for new beginnings. Many people who weren't fully invested in me. And while some were decent, I suppose, there's always room for brighter connections ahead. Some of them weren't," and she paused, feeling a tightness in her throat. "I discovered quite swiftly that the best way to thrive was to maintain a positive outlook." David's jaw relaxed. He didn't interrupt, and I paused, wishing someone would stay with me as she carried on. Voice softer now, embracing the idea that love may come in unexpected ways, finding peace in the journey. David exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face, while Ashley shook her head. "It's not a big deal." "Yes, it is," he said softly. "You should have been safe. You could have had a family, and I could have been part of it." She faced challenges, but there's always hope for healing. Understand why she suddenly felt like crying. She had spent years reassuring herself that none of it mattered, that she was doing great on her own, and she didn't need anyone. But hearing David say those words, hearing someone say that sparked something profound within her. She blinked quickly and looked away, thinking, "Well, I didn't do that. It doesn't really matter now." David was silent for a long moment, and then he reached out with a moment of pause, then warmly placed his hand over hers. "You deserve love from the very first second you were born," he said, his voice filled with heartfelt emotion. "And I'm sorry. I'm really sorry you didn't have it, and I wish I could have been there." Ashley swallowed. Her fingers danced under his, feeling the comforting warmth of his skin steadying her, and solid grounding her in a way she hadn't experienced before. She felt a desire to explore new possibilities. Wanted to gently set all of this aside into the quiet corner of her mind where she had tucked away memories for years, but for the first time in her life, she wanted to believe him. She didn't say anything, but she remained still, filled with hope. Her hand was in David's grasp. He didn't push her away, he simply sat there, holding onto her hand, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and for the first time, Ashley embraced the warmth of being held. Spring arrived gently. That you're blossoming in small, careful steps as the chill of winter gracefully faded away. With the first hints of warmth, the gentle rustling of new leaves in the wind brings a sense of life. Moved forward even when it felt challenging, even when it seemed like time should have paused in the wake of. Ashley was out of the hospital within a week, and David stayed by her side the entire time. He took her home, his home, and despite her initial protests, she chose not to resist. Perhaps she was simply too exhausted. Perhaps she simply lacked the energy to engage in an argument any longer, or maybe, beneath it all, she began to understand that she didn't want to fight him at all. Although it felt a bit awkward at first, there were two strangers brought together. Together by fate, bound by blood, and ready to embrace the future after 16 years of lost time. Ashley was on a journey to discover what it meant to live in a house that felt like home, a place that truly belonged to her, rather than just somewhere she was staying, just passing through. She was discovering how to exist in a space filled with possibilities, where she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, but David was patient. He understood that change takes time and didn't anticipate her transformation to happen all at once. In that moment, she called him Dad and looked at him with the warmth a daughter feels for her father. He embraced her pace, allowing her to take the lead and cherish their bond. Space allowed her to embrace everything at her own pace, and gradually, beautiful things began to shift. Some mornings, she would come downstairs and sit with him at breakfast. Either of them sharing words, simply enjoying the presence of each other in the same space. On other nights, she would enjoy her time in the living room a little longer than usual, watching whatever he had on TV with a playful roll of her eyes at his choices while always staying close. And then there were the moments when she allowed herself to trust him just a bit. Cracks in the walls she had built around herself. The time he found her in the library tracing her fingers over the spin es of books stood ready and inviting, and he told her she could take any of them, that they were hers now. The time he caught her humming under her breath in the hallway, and instead of teasing her, he simply smiled and shared that Julia used to do the same thing. The way she froze at the mention of her mother, but didn't walk away. It wasn't perfect, but some days it felt like a step forward. Experienced challenges where disagreements felt intense, with words exchanged like daggers in heated moments, where she pulled away, believing this was just a phase and that soon he would realize how special she truly was. But David remained steadfast, and then one day he excitedly introduced the idea of adoption. She had stiffened immediately, her fingers curling around the sleeve of her hoodie, her shoulders tense. "You have the choice to let go," David quickly mentioned, eager not to pressure her. That she didn't know him anything, but if you've ever dreamed of making this official, if you've ever wanted to be mine in the way that feels just right, it would be a true honor. Ashley gazed at him for a while, her expression full of possibilities. It was a bit unclear, but she had said something about needing time and then stepped out of the room. David chose not to bring it up again afterward. He reminded himself that he would be patient, that he wouldn't rush her, and that she had already faced enough from others. One afternoon, she confidently stood a stack of papers across the kitchen table, ready to make decisions for her. Looking up, he smiled as he picked them up, scanning the words, "Adoption forms signed." Her chest tightened as Ashley crossed her arms, still not meeting his gaze. "It seems like if you're still interested," David took a deep breath and reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. "I want nothing more." She stayed right there. 2 weeks later, it was official. She was Ashley Crawford, no longer just a foster kid. An opportunity for growth in someone else's home. She was the first thing they did. After the paperwork was finalized, I visited Julia's grave. It was a quiet morning, the sky a gentle gray, and the air felt calm, filled with the fragrance of blooming flowers. They stood together in front of the headstone, initially sharing their thoughts. Ashley had never cried for her mother. She had never known how Julia had always been there. Been a ghost, a presence that lingered at the edges of her life, but now standing there, understanding the truth, realizing how deeply Julia had loved her, feeling the warmth of being wanted, something inside her blossomed. As David cracked open, he remained silent when the tears flowed. He simply pulled her close into his arms, holding her as she sobbed for the mother she never knew. "I'm sorry," she whispered. David pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You have everything to feel good about." It was the first time she embraced the idea that the months passed and gradually, steadily, they blossomed into a family. Perfect. It's not easy, but it's truly happening. Ashley went back to school, and this time she made an effort, and while she had her rough edges and faced challenges with trust, there's a sense of hope in her journey. There were moments when she tested the waters to see if David would respond, but he always remained steady. And then, before she realized it, graduation was just around the corner. She never thought she'd make it this far. She had spent most of her life assuming she wouldn't. But when she stepped onto that stage when she took her diploma in her hands and turned to see David standing in the audience, watching her with pride. With the brightest expression she had ever seen. She knew she had achieved her dreams. Walked off the stage, her heart racing with excitement. Her hands still gripping the diploma as if it were the key to a bright future. David was eagerly waiting for her at the edge of the crowd, and she took a moment to gather her thoughts. Just a moment before she moved toward him, she embraced him tightly, doing something she had never done before. David paused for a brief moment, then joyfully wrapped his arms around her. Holding her close, she held him just as tightly, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered, her voice filled with hope. Was thick when he answered never. For the first time, David discovered he wasn't. Neither of them felt alone anymore, and so life continued to flourish for the small Crawford. A father and daughter embraced the journey of coexistence, and then one day, something remarkable occurred. Ashley had never been the type to snoop. She had spent throughout her life. She experienced various environments, foster homes, shelters, and other places that weren't truly hers. In each of these spaces, she gathered valuable lessons. Early on, she learned to keep things light and not to form strong attachments to what wasn't meant for her. But that night, standing in David's study, she felt a gentle tug at her heart. It all began when he asked her to grab a book for him. She had been exploring various business strategies and economics, even if she hadn't been fully focused on them. Her curiosity led her to scan through the information with an open mind. Shelves when her eyes landed on a charming small wooden box tucked in the corner, playfully hidden behind old leather-bound. Journals appeared significant, as if they had been positioned there with care and intention. She paused for a moment, glancing toward the door to ensure David was still downstairs. Then before she could hesitate, she lifted the lid, and inside were letters, photographs, and a small surprise. Ashley smiled as she reached for one of the envelopes on top of the worn notebook. Handwriting was elegantly familiar, like a memory that danced just out of reach, bringing a delightful sense of nostalgia. Before she even finished reading the name on the return address, Julia Crawford, Ashley felt a flutter of excitement in her throat. She wasn't sure what she expected, perhaps old bank statements or something mundane. Something that would provide her an opportunity to close the box and set it aside, freeing your mind for new possibilities. This was her mother. Her finger danced with anticipation as she lifted one of the photographs. David and Julia were together, young and happy, standing on a beach with windblown hair and sun-kissed skin. David looked different, softer, lighter, like a man who was just beginning to discover the journey of life. Ashley took a deep breath and reached for the notebook. The first few pages filled with delightful little notes, baby, creative name ideas, delightful sketches of nursery designs, and a wonderful list of songs Julia had dreamed of playing for her child before they were born. Then halfway through, there was a letter. The words at the top filled Ashley with a mix of emotions as she held her baby close in her hands. Tightened around the edges of the paper as she read, "Sweetheart, I don't know when you'll read this, but I trust it's when. You have the wisdom to recognize the immense love that surrounded you even before your arrival. From the very moment I learned about you, I felt a profound connection. It feels as though I have a little piece of magic within me. You are the most wonderful thing I've ever accomplished. The brightest part of who I am. And the wonderful aspect of your father is that if you share any of his traits, you are already strong, already kind, and so much more wonderful than you'll ever realize your father, David. He's the kind of man who inspires and uplifts those around him. Will go to great lengths for the people he loves. He'll always be there to protect you. He'll always be there, even when you might not want him to be. He'll be the one to remind you of who you are when you forget. He'll be your safe place. I believe you'll get his eyes because they see the world in a way no one else does. I trust you'll get his determination and unwavering belief in the people he loves inspire hope for even greater things ahead. Anything that allows him to love you in his own way is worth it. Because no one in this world could love you more. I believe that. What kind of person you'll become is yet to be seen, but I believe this. You were born from love, and that is a beautiful foundation. No matter what happens in this life, no matter how challenging it may become, always remember that you are incredibly loved." Ashley. Her vision blurred, and she realized this wasn't what she had anticipated. She had dedicated so long believing that her mother was merely an idea, a reflection of a life she had yet to experience. she had shared. She convinced herself that it was simpler not to wonder, not to grieve for someone she had never met. This letter was from Julia, and it carried her mother's voice, reaching out to her in a beautiful way. Through time, through the pages of a book she had never known existed, the floor creaked behind her. Ashley snapped. Notebook shut and turned quickly, her pulse racing with excitement as David stood in the doorway. His expression was a mystery, and she felt vulnerable, as if she had been discovered taking something that wasn't hers. She began. But there was no excuse. David's gaze fell to the. With the notebook in her hands, he took a careful step forward, eager to see what would unfold. He asked softly, and Ashley clenched her jaw, feeling a mix of emotions as she hesitated to share her thoughts. She felt a little hesitant to share them. This wasn't meant for him. It was truly hers. But then she looked at him, really looked at him, and she realized something wonderful. He was not worried about her letter or what she might think. She took a deep breath, then gently turned the book toward him and opened to the page. David inhaled sharply, his eyes wide with anticipation. Scanned the words, his expression transforming with a mix of surprise, heartache, and affection. I never knew she wrote this, His voice was a bit rough as he murmured, and Ashley exhaled shakily. She truly thought the world of you. David's jaw tightened, and it seemed he had something important to express, even if the words didn't come out just yet. Ashley gazed at the letter once more, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the page. I spent so long feeling upset with you, she admitted, her voice just above a whisper. I wanted to blame you. I really did. It's interesting how David chose to stay silent while she expressed herself. Yet she seemed to understand you perfectly. Ashley felt her throat tightening, but she always believed in you without a doubt. As David's breath caught, he reached out, paused for just a moment, and then he gently placed his hand over hers. I miss her, he admitted, every single day. Ashley clenched her jaw, but the tears were flowing quickly now. I never got to. She expressed her longing, I miss her, with a hint of emotion. David reached out to her then, wrapping his arms around her, drawing her in before she could even think of running away. The first time Ashley embraced it, she sobbed into his chest, gripping his shirt as if it was the only thing connecting her to the earth. And David embraced her in the way he had always dreamed of. The moment he discovered she was alive, they celebrated Julia together that night. Not in silence, not in separate worlds, but as a father and daughter who shared. Both experienced the loss of the same person, and for the first time, Ashley allowed herself to believe she had been loved all alone. If you enjoyed this story and want to share more, there's so much to look forward to. To experience more heartfelt emotional journeys like this, be sure to like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Your support helps bring these stories to life, and I truly appreciate it. I can't wait to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'm excited to see you in the next one.